Hello, Lizzie here. Today we're going to be making a diamond. Not a diamond, diamond. Diamond is I've done a mini sample, so you can either make this size or you can make it bigger. But I'll give you the basic building blocks, if you like, of what you're going to create. There we go. I'll put it sideways on so you can see diamond better. And you'll see why it's called diamond from the pattern in front of you. It's the theme for this particular month is the party theme. So consequently, I did it in really bright colours. So it looks really zingy, and the background fabric as well, the backing fabric as well, has been beautifully chosen by Daisy May Quilting when they quilted it for me. But I think you'll agree, it's a beautiful sample quilt, and I've done it so the red blocks are kind of facing down, but you could have it the other way around if you wanted to, and it looks equally as gorgeous. This one is a bright zingy colour, as you can see. And today I'm going to make one in a more sort of subtle colour, so you'll see the kind of yin yang of the pattern. It's a fairly well-known, I suppose, technique of making these designs, and you'll see that as we go along, and you'll recognise perhaps some of the names. But it's nice to have a dedicated pattern for it. And of course, like I said, you can make this as big as you want. Just for time's sake, I've made a smaller version, which actually would be lovely putting across my knees when we're in the motorhome or away or in the car, something like that, to keep my knees and legs warm. It'd be absolutely lovely. So this is diamond, and hopefully you'll be able to make one along with me. I've made all of my blocks bar one, so I shall do that block with you now so you can see what it looks like. So we'll start with the blocks that you need. You're going to be making a 9-patch block. I've done mine a particular size, but if you want to make it smaller or bigger, then look at the measurements I've used and just increase those to the size you want. Obviously, the bigger size square that you cut, then the bigger the patch, if you like, the block that you're going to make. And obviously where I've done what I've done, which is here, I've put it behind me now, yours, if you make it bigger, will be a lot bigger than that. So it's a kind of like make it in the sizes that I've suggested, and then perhaps you can increase and decrease depending on what you want to do with them. There's lots of variations of this, and we're actually going to stitch the blocks so they're on point, so there's going to be a little bit of cutting of blocks and things like that. So there's quite a lot going on. So if we look overhead, we're going to start first of all by placing our blocks down. Now I've done these in a particular order. You can see I've chosen completely different colourway, really sort of lovely purples and kind of blues to match that. Now I'm going to lay mine down on my desk so I can see where these pieces go. So if I pop them here, and when the actual top is put together, then you'll see a definite light to dark tones coming through, which is really lovely. So let's just get these placed down. I want that one in the middle. It's got a little bit scrunched. That one goes there. That one goes there. That one on the end there. And that one there. There we go. So you can see how that is laid out. I've got like pairs of everything except the middle one. So there's your pairs there, and then you've got your outside corner squares. So when you look at the pattern, I'm going to be doing in the primary colours, but this is a good reference of any other colours that you use to see that to get that in the right place, that needs to perhaps be a darker shade. Obviously I'll leave that for you to decide, but it worked out well because this is the one that's going to get cut into 4. So maybe you'll come up with a different variation which is just as gorgeous. So what we need to do now, once we've got those blocks laid out, those squares laid out, we're going to actually piece them together, and obviously it's going to be as simple as ABC. So we're going to literally stitch the top row first, then the second row, I'm just moving this out of the way so I can get my machine in, and then the third row. Now of course you can piece these together, you can chain piece, which is what I'll do, because it then is much easier for them to nest. You can open the seams up if you want to, or you can have them pressed to one side. I'll leave that for you to decide. In the one that I made down here, all of those seams are pressed open. The one I'm making now, the seams are all pressed to the side, and there's no right or wrong. So let's get the machine into position. So we're going to chain piece. So I'm taking the first two of the top row, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Try and get these first of all cut well, cut carefully, and then I'll turn my stitch length down. Oftentimes quilters will say use a stitch length of 2, but I think on this occasion I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.4. So there's my first 2 of my top row. Now I'm going to stitch the row 2 and the first 2 blocks, and I'm just continuing stitching. And then I'm going to stitch the first 2 of the third row together. And I'm going to break my thread. So then if I bring all those pairs back up again, I'm just going to join the third one on each square. So there's my first 2, and this is the third one. So again, just line them up. And of course, if you need to trim any of this when you've finished, then just trim as the least amount that you need to. So now I'm stitching the third one of the second row. If you're using directional fabric, just keep an eye on the direction of your fabrics. Maybe that's something you want to think about. To be honest, if you're going to follow my pattern and you stitch these on point, having directional fabric could be a little bit confusing of how to work out how to cut the fabric. So I would say if you're a beginner, stick to non-directional or plains. Batik are particularly good. So now I've got my 3 rows. You can see if I lift these up, you can see what they look like there. If I put this on my overhead, it's probably best not to take it from the machine, but if I put it on my overhead, you can see that all 3 rows, they're actually joined together with the chain stitch, if you like, that you've been doing between each piece. So all of these are joined together. So now what you're going to do, you could iron this so your seams are beautifully flat, but I prefer just to start layering them up. So you're putting one on top of the other, and you're making sure that you nest your seams. So in other words, one seam goes one way and one seam goes the other. So let's bring the machine in again. Again, don't forget you're doing a 1/4 inch, and do measure that. Either use a foot, as I'm doing, or use some tape so you know where your 1/4 inch is. And it's better to use a scant 1/4 inch than one that's too much. So there's our first row. And then we're just going to put our second and third row together, and because they are already joined, it means I know exactly where each row is positioned. It's very, very easy to do. It just perhaps takes a little bit of concentration when they're all joined together. But as this is only a 9 patch, it shouldn't be too difficult for you. So I'm just nesting those seams, making sure my fabrics are lined up beautifully. So there we are, there's our 9 patch created. And now it just needs a nice press, trim our threads if you've got any to trim. Keep everything nice and neat if you can, and you can see how that looks. If we put it back to how it should look when we first started, then that's how it ends up. And of course you can see, because we chain piece them, the actual points, if you like, if that's important to you, they look really fabulous. So I'm just going to go and press that. I'll come back to you. Okay, so now I've pressed the block, it's lovely and flat. I've pressed the seams over to one side. You can, like I say, you can open your seams if you want to. Now we need to recut that piece. Don't feel daunted by this. Literally, it's a straight cut. 2 straight cuts. So if we have a look on the overhead, so there's the piece that I've just created. It's lovely and pressed. So you're going to measure from the seam here, the seam that you've just created. So if I bring that up, you're going to measure from this seam out to find the center of your center set of 3 blocks, if you like. So I'm going to place my ruler on there. I know what the measurement is. The measurement is actually in the pattern, so you need to follow that if you're going to create the same size blocks as me. If you change your blocks, then obviously all you need to do is find that center point. So again, I'm just going to lay my ruler over the top, make sure it's nice and square. Just run your rotary cutter through the middle, and although it feels such a shame when you've just created a lovely block, that's what you need to end up with. So the next thing we need to do is to then create the actual block that we're going to make our design from. So if I bring one in for me as a reference point, and you'll have the pattern as your reference point. So we need this one there, so that is the same as that. We need this one here, so you can see how that looks. Then you need this one in the corner, and you need these 2 little squares diagonally opposite, and you need that one in the corner like that. So in other words, you've got these 2 squares on the outside, these 2 squares in the middle, and in actual fact, that's really, if I get it correct for me, that's really how I want it to look, okay? But as long as you've got those outside little squares there, and the 2 little inside squares looking like that, then you can't go far wrong. You need it so this fabric is all the same, and this fabric is all the same. So you can see how that looks. Probably easier to see the lighter colour than the darker colour, especially because it's mottled. It might look like different fabric. But you can see also that I've got those big squares in that position and those big squares in that position, and that will really help you. Really help you. Okay, so the next thing to do is to join these together. So when we join these together, we're going to join the top 2 together, the bottom 2 together, and then the 2 pairs together. As simple as that. So let's bring the machine in. We'll just move mine over. There we go. And if you can leave them flat on your desk, it's much easier to pick them up and know you've got them in the right place. So again, a scant 1/4 inch, or a 1/4 inch if your foot is correct. Recently I've had troubles with a foot that's supposed to be 1/4 inch and it isn't. So again, we're chain piecing. And of course you can do all of this in one go. So you can do all of your blocks, then cut, and then remake them again like we're doing now. So if we look on the overhead, those are my top 2 blocks stitched together, my bottom 2 blocks stitched together, and they are joined in the centre, which, like I said before, makes it really easy to get that centre point beautiful. So flip them over, and then all you're going to do is join them together. Now if you wanted to, if some of your edges are not square, you could trim, but the danger always, especially if you're cutting, recutting, is you're going to lose the size. So if you're slightly out on some of your edges, if some of them aren't quite right, I would say just use your 1/4 inch guide and assume that all of that is straight, and even if some is a little bit sticking out or some a little bit shorter, just go for your 1/4 inch all the way along rather than trim. So looking on the overhead, there we are, that's our piece made and it's looking absolutely gorgeous. All we need to do now is press it. So we're almost ready to put all our blocks together. So in the pattern I tell you exactly how many you're going to make and where to cut and which ones to cut, all that sort of thing. So don't panic, I haven't got ahead of you. All I've done is made the correct amount of blocks for the little pattern behind us, the little, I'm not going to call it a quilt because it's not big enough, but it's our sample quilt, and I'll tell you in the pattern how many you need to cut for that sample quilt. Before we do that, you might want to just neaten up your edges now. So if you haven't done that yet, great. I have to be honest with you, I prefer it if you didn't. So now's the time to look at the little block that you've made, which is just looking gorgeous, and get your cutting mat and your ruler, and you can see some of my edges aren't beautiful. I'm okay with that. But what we're going to do is just trim all these little edges off. If the ruler is flashing, I'm so sorry. So you're just literally taking slivers away, just little slithers away. You really don't want to take great lumps off. You're talking about squaring up and taking a few little slithers of fabric away. And in the pattern again, I tell you exactly the measurement of the square that you want to end up with. But if you don't end up with that size square, then that square is unique to you. Again, we just just lining up and just trimming, just making sure that our fabric is nice and square and neat, ready for the next stage. Okay, the next stage is actually find a space, maybe on the floor in your sitting room or in a hallway, anywhere where you've got a little bit of space. As you can see, it's not massive, but if you make a bigger one, you'll need a bigger space because you need to lay all these blocks out now, so you know exactly where they're going to be, what you need to cut next, because we're going to cut some of these blocks in half diagonally, and there's 2 different ways of doing this, so please pay attention. Otherwise you're going to have to make more blocks. So because I've done a shading, if you like, a light to dark, it's easy. So if we put it on the overhead, you'll see this is my dark. You can see how that looks. There's my light. And I've done that deliberately so it's visually correct for you. So although perhaps you can't see it all, I'm laying the blocks out that matches that. So you can see I've got my dark here, a dark. This one, here's the dark. Let's make sure, there we are, there's the dark. You can see there's your light area. So in the pattern I tell you what's dark and what's light. So I'll move these out of the way. You'll only see a certain amount of this, but that's okay because I'll keep moving it so you know exactly what you need to do to lay it out. And in the pattern it shows you. So we're just going to build this up like that, and then you're putting 2 more here. As I say, although it's small, it's still quite big for my desk for you to see. And I've got no other means of showing you. Oh, there we go, that goes down here. So you can see that joins on like that and comes down here. Now then, if I bring these pieces down here, this is the important bit. Okay, so what you've got, and you'll have more coming down here, so don't be misled that that's the end of the quilt, but it isn't, because this one goes here like that. But what you've got are these side pieces here and this top piece here, and you need to fill that with the half cuts I'm going to talk to you about now. Okay, so now we've made all our blocks. How do we put them together? We're going to actually stitch these diagonally. I'm going to show you as much as I can on the overhead. It's not easy because although it's a small piece, obviously it's much, much bigger than my table. So we need to start off with our first blocks, which we can just see if I get that in there like that. And then you're going to put 2 either side. And you'll notice that the darker point is facing down, and then you've got the lighter points here. There we go. And you'll continue to do that until you've got 3 full blocks going down here. So 1, 2 and then 3. And like I say, I'll do as much as I can so you can see, but I'll move something in a minute so it makes a little bit more sense. And that comes down here somewhere. So this is the most important thing now, because we want to be able to create this into a square. Okay, so we want this to be squared off. And in order to do that, we need to start cutting into the blocks that we've just made. Now don't get alarmed. Don't get alarmed. It's easier than you think. Because what we need to do on this side is to have half a block. So if I pop that there, we're going to have half a block here. But that half goes over here. So I know this is going to be difficult for some people to follow, but I'll do the best I can in explaining. So I'm putting my block on my cutting mat. I'm getting my rotary cutter and my big ruler, and you can see I've put it in an angle where I can easily cut across my block here. What you really want to try and aim for is your ruler going through the point of your squares here, and you're going to cut that diagonally in half like that. There we go. So this one, let me just move my mat, this one will fit here, okay, and this one will fit over there like that. And you'll do the same here, and you'll do the same here, okay? And in the pattern it shows you the grid of the blocks. So if I spread those out, so you can see my white table underneath, you'll see what that looks like. That's a much better view. Now, to create these 2 halves, we need to cut across our block. Okay, now interestingly, 1 half goes up here and 1 half will go on the bottom of the quilt. But if I do the cut anyway, you'll see what I mean. So we're cutting, this time we're cutting through across. So because we've used different fabrics here, you can see that the difference of the cut. So this cut we're going through the lighter blue. With this cut we're going through these actually rather gorgeous mottled squares there. So this is why you need to follow a plan. You need to have a definite diagram of where your fabrics are and what you need to cut. I've provided the diagram for you, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Let me just move my mat out of the way. Oops, hold on. There we go. So the first one goes in here, so let's see, make sure I got the right one. Yep, that goes there. Okay, so that's, do you see that's the dark section? So it all matches up with being at the bottom. The other half, if you look at the other half of the square that I've just cut, is actually a light section, and that goes at the bottom of your quilt. Okay, so just to add to confusion. So what we need to do with this top one is to cut another one so it matches that half. So don't forget, we're going, I just remember it being out, we're going through the mottled corners for the second cut. For the first cut we go through the light, for the second we're going through the mottled. Your fabric's going to be different but it's good if you name it, number it, label it, and I'll show you in a sec what I do right from the get-go. So there's my 2 pieces. There we go. So you can see what they look like. I'll keep it on my mat. So you can see we've got a definite dark side and a definite light side. That light side will go on the bottom of the quilt. This one goes up here. So if I was to take this and pop it in there, look, hey presto, it's absolutely perfect. And this one I shall keep for the bottom of the quilt. And like I say, you'll need a little bit of space. So the next thing would be to cut these 2 halves. So don't forget, we're cutting through the light. So if I bring the square in, and we're cutting through the light. Okay, hopefully that's cut all the way through. Oh, just a little bit there. Okay. So don't forget, these go in a particular place. It's always the dark at the bottom. So if I bring this one over, hold on, let's just get my mat out of the way. If I bring this one over, then it's going to fit in there. Let's just get the right one. And that, you can see, is now the dark there. You can just about see it on my desk. If I flip it, you can see it. And then the other half, which is this one here, goes on the other side like that. And you can see, even though I've only got a little bit of desk showing, you can see how that's looking. So if I move these all about again, it's just the cutting that might confuse you, that you'll need to think about for a little while. Okay, so now I've split them up, you can see how that looks. So that's how we get our rectangle, our little quilt topper here behind me. Now when we come to stitch, you're going to stitch across all of these. So first of all, you're going to join them together like you would any other block, and then you're going to stitch the rows together. So it's up to you how you do this, but I like to do stitch the blocks together, stitch these blocks together, and then stitch that to that. Then stitch these blocks together and down, and then stitch that to that. So and all the time I've got a visual of what my next row looks like. And can I suggest that you actually find a space in your room somewhere to lay all these down on the floor, so you know exactly what order they're going in. Because we're doing everything on the point, it's not quite as logical as just doing blocks. You know, if you were to do 9 patchwork blocks, it's easy, very easy to see that. With it on the diagonal, not so much. I hope I haven't put you off. So I'm going to start joining these together. I'll join the rows to the blocks to make a row, and then I'll show you what that looks like when it's stitched together. I think that'll be the best thing to do, and then we can create the actual diagonal rows. I think that would be a good thing to do. So I'll go away and prepare that for you. So the first row we sew together is the top right hand corner. So it's the 2 triangles. So it's a triangle that we cut across what I call the spotty or the motley squares, and it's the other triangle we cut through the light squares, and that's our top right hand corner. So these are going to be stitched together, 1/4 inch seam allowance and a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance as well, and I will press that after each stage. So just line up your edges as normal, find your 1/4 inch, line them up at the bottom, and then we'll just press that seam. Now I would press it as you wish, whichever side you want to press it to, because of the amount of different fabrics you're using. There isn't, well, in my case, there isn't really a dark and a light side, but if you want to follow that, then you decide what what side it's going to be pressed to. You can always change it as you add your rows, just make sure that you're consistent. So looking at that now, we have created that top corner, and that's what it looks like. Okay, so we'll just pop that to one side, and then we're going to stitch the next row. So I've picked up my next row, I've put it down on my desk here, and I've pinned the edges together that need sewing. So from this angle it might look a bit weird, but you can see if I just put it on the 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'll move my pin so it's a little bit more in the right place. I think that one's okay. That one's a little bit too far in for you to see, so let's just move that. So you can see that I've picked up the diagonal. I know you can't see it all, but if I just move that piece, the piece that we've just stitched fits there. Let me move that in. That fits there. So you can see my next row is across the diagonal. Okay, so I'll stitch that, press that, come back, and you can see what those two rows look like together. Okay, I've stitched my row together. This is what it looks like. Like I say, it's on the diagonal. So now I'll put it down on my table so you can see what it looks like on my table. So you can see by stitching on the diagonals we've done, this row now just gets attached to this row, and you end up obviously with a rectangle at the end of all of this, because your next row will come down here. So that's how you continue building up the quilt. And obviously when you get to the bottom, you'll have the opposites of these, you'll have the lights showing, you'll see as you've cut and now how you place them down, you'll see how that works. And like I say, there's the diagrams in the pattern to follow, which are really, I must say, super easy. So now what I'm going to do is stitch this row to this row, and then I'll continue stitching all the way along until I've completed my little topper. So I've pieced all my rows together, all on the diagonal. I've given it a really good press, so all the seams are lying as they should be, and that's the finished topper, if you like, the little sort of sampler quilt, let's put it that way. So now what we need to do is to quilt it. Now we're going to quilt through this topper, wadding and backing, but there's a special way of doing this because I'm going to use my backing as my binding. So the first thing we need to do is to place our wadding on the back of our topper. So if I place my wadding on my desk, and then we'll kind of build it up. Now my wadding at the moment is bigger, so I'm going to trim that down, but there's a way I do this. I don't have a massive cutting mat here today, so I'm going to cut with scissors, which is absolutely fine, but if you've got a big cutting mat, a ruler, a rotary cutter that will take the size of this, then please go ahead and use that. So I need to stand up. And I'm going to lay my wadding down. At the moment, like I say, it's bigger than it should be. Smooth it out, and I'm going to use my spray to put some glue down. So this is temporary fabric glue, perfect for what we're doing. And I'm going to lay my little top on the top of that and smooth it out. Now you're dealing with lots of bias edges here, so be careful you don't completely distort it, but what you do need to do is to make sure that that top is actually lovely and flat on your wadding, and then there's no puckers. So we'll bring it down a little bit here, and we'll lift this up and spray this half. Don't need a huge amount, but it's going to help you keep everything in place. We're just about on the edge there, but I'm okay with that because we're actually going to cut to that edge. Now normally in quilting you leave your wadding a lot bigger than your top. In this instance we're not. We're cutting it to the size of our top because we're using the backing fabric as our binding. So all I'm going to do now is get my scissors. Make sure all this is as spread out as best you can. When we flip it over, you might find that the wadding needs another, what I call a bit of a stroke. Now, obviously, if you've got a big cutting mat, you're going to use your cutting mat and your ruler to cut this, as I said before. It's a lovely crunchy sound, isn't it? So I'm just trimming this away. Some you'll see and some you won't. I've got bigger scissors somewhere. Just make sure that's still sticking. Trim any dog ears as you go. So then this top part, just be careful with it because you might have spent many hours getting to this stage. And the last one now, so let's just try and swivel this around. Now the glue will have helped all of this stay in place. So you can see I'm cutting my dog ears off. Let's get that out of the way. Tiny little bit there, and really not much to worry about, but we'll cut it anyway. Okay, so now we've got the whole piece backed with wadding. There we are. I'll bring it in, you can see what it looks like. There's the wadding on the back. Now what I do suggest you do is just spend a moment just making sure that your wadding isn't creased anywhere. Make sure it's lying nice and flat. And now what we need to do is to attach, let's just show you on the front there. Now we need to attach the backing to our wadding and our top. So again, we're going to do this in stages. Just make sure your backing completely covers your wadding by at least 2 or 3 inches. So I'm just going to stand up to do this. Again, we're going to spray and lay our backing over the top. And if we need to adjust at any stage, then we'll be able to. But like I say, you need at least 2 inches. I would go for more. I've probably got 3 either side here. Difficult for you to see at the moment. If I pull that back, there we are, you can see what that looks like. Make sure it's really well adhered. And what I like to do is when I've got my backing on, I like to take it to the iron and iron it all down. I think it does help the glue to set. So just bring that over. Make sure your wadding is well over. I mean, it's slightly to an angle here, but I know that I've got plenty of room, so I need at least, the minimum I need is 1 inch, and that's the minimum because we're going to cut this. You can see the outline of my quilt there, my little topper, but we will eventually cut this back to 1 inch. So if I fold that back, we've got plenty of fabric here. But I'm going to take this to the iron now and just press that backing in place. Okay, I have actually now ironed my backing to my wadding, so you can't see much, but trust me, there's 3 layers here. So please don't worry about cutting your backing fabric down once you've got it attached to through all your layers. So we've got the topper, we've got the wadding, and we've got the backing. So we're now going to quilt it. Now you can really have fun now quilting. You can stipple quilt if you like your free motion. I'm going to stick to my regular stitch. I'm going to whack it up to 3. And then it makes it speedy. But you can echo quilt, you can do whatever you want to do, but try and be consistent with your design. So all I'm going to do is an echo quilt. So I'm going to go along my diagonals. So let's get it under the machine. I'm not going to stitch in the ditch. I'm going to go 1/4 inch away from one of the seams. So I'm going to pick a seam and I'm going to go above it. If you wanted to, you could start in the middle and come out. But it's quite a small piece. So just find the next diagonal seam. And on your domestic machine, this will easily fit. I would say avoid doing stitch in the ditch because you've really got to be accurate with that. Okay, so that's 2 lines done. So take it up, right up to the raw edge. And if you've got a nice big table for your machine, be great to use it now. Okay, I'm going to turn this around just for ease. But just make sure you're stitching on the right side of the seam. In this case, it's actually the left side. So that's all my diagonal lines going from left to right. So now we want to do the diagonal lines going the other way. So we're going to do a big crosshatch. And again, I'm going above the seam line. So I'm keeping this consistency going. So moving along to the next one. So keep adjusting. It will get caught on things. Be surprised. So make sure we're on the right seam. Just check and double check. Yeah. Just swizzle this around. Okay, that's all my seams stitched. There's obviously more that you can do. You can sort of echo quilt in some of the squares here, but for speed, let's keep it at that. If we look at the back, you'll see that I've got big crosshatch designs, almost identical to the squares that we've just put together, the blocks we've done. So now it's the time to trim your whole piece down. So again, I'll need to get my big cutting mat out, my ruler, my rotary cutter, because we need to be accurate now. So now I've got the quilt top on my desk with all the 3 layers put together and quilted. So now we need to create the binding effect, and we're using the backing fabric as our binding. We're bringing it forward to the top of the quilt. It's actually a super duper easy way of making your binding, and I think it's a little bit more simple than if you were doing your regular binding, but you need to be fairly accurate with it, and there's a technique for the corners. So if you keep watching, you'll be able to see what I do. So in this instance, I'm cutting 1 inch away from the raw edges of my top, but you might want to go a little bit bigger. There's no reason why you don't want, you could go 1.5 inches, 2 inches even. It just makes your binding look that little bit bigger, but of course you won't have the benefit of the wadding and the quilt topper in that if you make it any wider. So we'll stick to the 1/2 inch as the fold over. So if you look from the overhead now, I'm just going to see the edge of my topper here. I'm just going to put my ruler just away from the edge there, and I'm going to cut, let's just trim that away so you can see, I'm going to cut that back all the way around 1 inch, but by all means make it bigger. The actual process is the same regardless. Okay, so I'll work my way round and I'll come back to you. Okay, I've trimmed all the way around and I've got 1 inch of the backing bigger than the quilt top and the wadding. So if you look here now, you can see that we've got that inch border going all the way around. If I take my mat out the way, it makes it a little bit clearer. Now the next stage is you need to do this in the correct order. You need to bring your raw edge to the raw edge of your quilt topper here. So you've got your inch, so bring the raw edge to the raw edge of your quilt topper here, and then you're going to fold that all over to the front. Now you could pin this or you can press it. So I'll just pin for the moment so you can see what it looks like. So I get my hand away. Okay, so that's what it will look like that. If I take the mat away, you can see it a little bit clearer. And then what you're going to do is that you're going to, I would always press this. I find it much easier if I press. You're going to make a diagonal fold like that. And you can press that. So you've got that permanent fold there. Beautiful. And then you're going to take this long edge here, you're going to fold the raw edge up to the raw edge of your topper again. And again, I would press it so it stays put. I mean, that looks just beautiful like that. And then what you're going to do is bring that folded edge here up across onto your quilt, and can you see you've got the most perfect 45 degree. I'm going to just pin that so it stays put. There you go. So if I take my mat away, it looks even better, and if we get a zoom in shot there, you'll see what it looks like. So if you want to see how that's done again, just rewind that little bit, save me repeating it. So now all you're going to do is top stitch, and you're going to top stitch all the way through the layers, and that's going to create your binding, and it is really, really neat and tidy, and you really always get the most beautiful 45 degree corner here. Really lovely. If I hold it up, you can see what that looks like. Beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch all the way around, and please pin, please iron as you go. It makes for a really nice, neat, accurate finish. Okay, I'll get back to you. So there we are. I have bound the whole piece. Quick and easy, simple, effective. Much easier than doing your regular binding. It is to bring the binding from the back over to the front. Obviously you're going to choose a complementary fabric for the backing, so it looks lovely on the front as well. But I think you'll agree it's a lovely little quilt. Now if I just get it so it's the right way, so there we are. So I've got my dark diamonds. Let me move it over this way. So we've got the dark diamonds facing down, just like we've got the brights at the back there. If I put the two side by side together, you can see, whoop, there we are. That's what they look like. I think they look great. So don't forget, you can make your squares a whole lot bigger. You can obviously add, you can put more rows onto this and make it a larger size quilt. But for me, for demonstration purposes, it's absolutely perfect. I love it. I actually love the primary colours best of all, because obviously this month it's party month. So this is the pattern called Diamond, and I hope you make lots.